My name is Julia Vega. That morning, I got fired. No warning, no conversation. Just a sterile email from HR at 8:17 a.m. with the subject line, "Separation Notice, effective immediately." I didn't even blink. My coffee was still warm, the sky still gray, and the city outside my window oblivious to the fact that my 5-year career at Ethernet Solutions had just been erased with one auto-generated message. I didn't argue. I didn't appeal. I just closed the email, shut my laptop, and left my badge on the desk. Then I did what I'd been preparing to do since Tuesday night. I walked straight to the basement server room. Not the main one, the legacy one beneath it. The one no one logged into anymore, unless they knew it still mattered. And I entered the command I wrote myself, years ago, for this exact possibility. Collapse, System X, AE0317. The screen blinked. There was a moment of pause, like the servers were holding their breath. Then the metrics began to fall. Steadily. Completely. $90 million in phantom revenue evaporated from the Ethernet dashboards. It wasn't stolen. It was never real to begin with. Let me explain. I was the lead cybersecurity analyst at Ethernet, a mid-sized cloud infrastructure company with big dreams and even bigger blind spots. You wouldn't notice me in a meeting. I didn't wear startup-issue hoodies or talk in jargon. I liked clean code, quiet rooms, and security systems that actually worked. 3 nights ago, I was working late. I had insomnia, and nothing calms my mind like tracing digital footprints. I ran a routine scan for legacy systems. Nothing major, just an internal audit to clean up old logins and patch forgotten endpoints. But then I found something. AE0317, root. It should have been gone. That server had been listed as decommissioned during the 2022 infrastructure migration. It hadn't pinged for 26 months, but somehow it was not only alive, it had been accessed 3 hours earlier by someone inside the company. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe an old script or a forgotten patch relay. But as I tunneled into the server, decrypted the logs, and ran access traces, it became clear. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. Thousands of cloaked data packets rerouted through international proxy layers, fake traffic, spoofed engagement numbers, ghost requests bouncing between Singapore, Zurich, and Nova Scotia before re-entering our system. The traffic spikes that marketing had been bragging about? Artificial. Completely fabricated. Every quarterly investor deck that boasted record adoption rates? Lies. Backed by data from this server. Some team had built a shadow pipeline to inflate Ethernet's user metrics. And it worked. Investors had been pouring in. The board was thrilled. Our stock price had tripled. And yet, under it all, was this one dusty server, holding up a house of cards. I copied everything, every log, every script, every line of source code tied to the AE0317 server. I didn't go to sleep that night. I sat in my apartment with 3 monitors glowing and watched as the pieces aligned. The access credentials? Admin level, masked behind a rotating user handle. mroot. Marcus Caldwell, our CTO, the man who gave a TEDx talk on digital transparency. I didn't confront him. I wasn't that naive. Instead, I drafted an anonymous whistleblower report. I scheduled 3 timed deliveries, one to the SEC, one to our top 2 Series C investors, and one to a journalist I knew personally from my DEF CON days. But I also left behind one final safeguard. A script tied to the AE0317 server. A tripwire. If Marcus or anyone tried to delete the evidence before the report hit inboxes, the collapse system command would run. And this morning, I woke up to silence. My Slack was locked. My corporate email, inaccessible. Badge access, denied. HR hadn't even offered a call. Just a cold little sentence in an email. Your employment has been terminated. That was the cue. They knew what I found. And they thought firing me would be the end of it. So I walked into the building one last time, through the old stairwell entrance that security barely monitored anymore, and made my way to the backup server stack. I logged in. The command was already queued. I hit execute, and the system collapsed. Not in a dramatic crash, but in a quiet, exact way. Every fake user vanished. Every fraudulent metric flatlined. The dashboards updated in real time, like they were waking from a long, artificial dream. By the time Marcus saw what had happened, the reports were already sent. The emails were out. The press embargoes were ticking down. And me? I walked home, kicked off my shoes, sat on my floor in sweatpants. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I waited. Because I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. They say when you pull a thread, you never really know what kind of fabric you're unraveling. I thought I'd pulled the final thread when I executed Collapse System. I thought the house of cards would fall, and the architects behind it would scatter in the wind. I was wrong. It was 11:12 p.m. on the same day I nuked AE-0317 when I saw it, an anomaly inside the sandbox environment I'd set up on my home rig to watch for any orphaned behavior. The system should have been clean. I'd scrubbed the logs, cleared the demons, and sealed the channels. But something was still breathing beneath the surface. It started as a loop, a low-activity echo pinging at regular intervals, then a data packet, then another. Not to Ethernet's public IPs. These were rerouting through a secondary domain, one I hadn't flagged yet. Not because I missed it, but because I knew it. backload.vrx. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. That naming convention, it wasn't random. It was Eli Hartman. Or at least, it was how he used to tag his experimental frameworks when we worked late nights in the old R&D annex. God, Eli. Brilliant, reckless, sardonic. The kind of guy who drank black coffee out of an army canteen and once built a recursive honeypot just to prank our intern. He was more legend than employee. His code had fingerprints, tight, elegant lines wrapped in stubborn silence. If I was jazz, Eli was math. Clean logic, unforgiving architecture. He'd left in the middle of a winter storm 2 years ago, after a very public fallout with John Reyes, our last CTO. I remember it vividly. The glass-walled war room on the 4th floor, Eli leaning forward like a wolf, cold fury in his eyes. "You don't fix architecture with optimism," he'd said, slamming a whiteboard marker on the table. "You fix it with control." Then he was gone. No goodbye, no forwarding contact, just an empty desk and a half-burned copy of Neuromancer left behind like a dare. And now, his code was here, alive, modified, running. I dove back into the logs. The structure of the new loop wasn't just reminiscent of Eli, it was him, his string compression algorithm, his fragment signature. Even the way the failovers redirected to cold storage nodes. This was his style. And someone had layered new scaffolding on top of it, just enough to obfuscate its origins. But they'd left the bones, the ghost of Eli's hand. I checked the compile date. 6 weeks ago, long after he'd left, long after we'd all moved on. Except he hadn't moved on. He was back. I tunneled into the consultant onboarding logs, ones I still had access to, thanks to a forgotten exploit on an old dev portal Marcus never patched. There it was. Elias Hartman, external specialist. Consultant role, infrastructure integrity review. Authorization level, executive override. Authorized by Vivian Doss, CTO. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Vivian, the new golden child, all sleek confidence and disruptive flair. She was hired 6 months ago, supposedly to reinvent the foundation. She talked about the future of security like it was a TED Talk, made sweeping changes on day 2, and now she'd brought him back, not quietly, officially, through a fast-tracked contract buried beneath layers of HR redirection, and that contract gave Eli full-spectrum access, including root, which meant Collapse System hadn't destroyed the infrastructure. Not completely. It had just triggered a fallback protocol, one he had designed. My script was a weapon, his was a shield, and now, like two ghosts from different wars, our code was colliding in the dark. I ran a hash comparison between the injected shell on AE00377 and an old archive I'd kept, a rogue proof of concept from one of Eli's sandbox projects, a tool he once called Glassmouth, designed to simulate zero-day infiltration without triggering alerts. It had been scrapped, deemed too dangerous, too manipulative. The hashes were a 94% match. He hadn't just returned. He was reactivating something we had once sworn never to build. The implications hit me hard. If Eli was running Glassmouth inside Ethernet's infrastructure, that meant the fake metrics weren't the attack. They were the cover. The real payload was deeper. Maybe it hadn't even launched yet. I sat there, staring at the screen, and I thought about the last time I saw Eli. His fury, his brilliance, his hatred for incompetence, his obsession with systems that couldn't be trusted. We used to argue constantly about ethics, about control, about what happens when the people meant to protect the system become its greatest threat. He used to call me the conscience of the firewall. I used to call him the architect of paranoia. Now we were on opposite sides of something neither of us fully controlled. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and opened a secure line to the only person I still trusted from our old Red Team days, Kendra. If anyone could help me trace the remaining infrastructure, it was her. Because Eli was inside now. And this time, I wasn't just fighting to expose a lie. I was fighting a ghost I once loved. No reason, no justification, just a quiet shutdown of the company's most advanced security layer. I pulled the access log. User, ehartman.consult. It was authorized. I don't know why that hit me harder than the server manipulation or the ghost traffic. Maybe because this wasn't subtle. This wasn't masked. It was brazen. He had permission. And not just permission. He had override clearance. Clearance that was supposed to be reserved for core ops and executive security. I checked the permissions trail. It had been granted by Vivian herself. A signed authorization dated 2 days before the AE0377 server came back online. I sat there in stunned silence. He didn't infiltrate the system. He didn't sneak in. They opened the door. This wasn't a rogue attack. This was an inside job. And the worst part? The algorithmic checks that were supposed to stop this kind of abuse, our automated flagging AI, our change detection heuristics, our metadata validators, they were all in place. But every one of them had been throttled. Their alert thresholds raised just high enough that they wouldn't trigger on anything short of nuclear meltdown. That was no accident. Someone knew how the system worked. Someone knew exactly what to suppress, how far to push before the watchdogs barked, and only someone with deep architectural-level knowledge could have executed it cleanly. That meant Eli hadn't just returned. He had learned everything we built after he left, and someone gave him the keys. I had one choice. I shut down the monitoring algorithms and bypassed the entire detection stack. No AI, no pre-coded response triggers, just me and raw access. I pulled out my backup laptop, no corporate firmware, air-gapped, no traceable Mac, and tunneled directly into the diagnostics interface. A path I hadn't touched in years. One I helped design back in the earliest days of Ethernet's security layer. Manual override. The code was archaic, pre-GPT. No autocomplete, no safety net, just raw commands and pure trust in my hands. It felt like holding a scalpel after years of robotic surgery. No filters. No AI to second-guess my instincts. And I found it. A secondary tunnel, buried under a dormant system call tied to a codebase we'd supposedly deprecated during the infrastructure overhaul in 2022. It looked like a firmware update handler, but it wasn't. It was a backdoor. And not just any backdoor. It was a recursive stack injection built into the firmware layer of our own behavioral detection hardware. Eli had embedded it into the devices themselves. The sensors that tracked behavior anomalies, the heartbeat of the system, had been rerouted. They were feeding him data. Not only were they blind, they were betraying us. And all of it, was stamped with a valid project ID. Project Orbital. Status: approved. Owner: Hartman, Elias. Consult. Sponsor: CTO. DOS. I actually had to lean away from the screen for a second. They'd created a project for him, gave it a name, gave it a status. The fake traffic, the dead server, the sleeping watchdogs. It was all under the umbrella of a sanctioned initiative, which meant the attack wasn't just tolerated, it was authorized from the inside. There's a strange kind of quiet that only comes between 3 and 5 a.m., the kind where your own breathing sounds too loud, where the city forgets to hum, and you realize if the world ended right now, it might take hours before anyone noticed. That's when I worked best, because systems don't lie in the middle of the night. People do. And by now, I knew this wasn't about some rogue hacker with a grudge. This was structural, intentional, designed from within. After isolating Project Orbital, Eli's buried framework, I started a full neutralization sequence. I wasn't planning to delete it. That would be suicide. Any deletion triggers could activate a failsafe, and I had no doubt Eli had built some nuclear-grade contingencies in case anyone tried to erase his work. So I starved it instead. I rerouted heartbeat signals to an isolated sandbox that mimicked real-time traffic patterns, flooded the loops with stale but plausible audit data, and disarmed the execution threads by rerouting them to null paths. Think of it like placing the entire system in a digital coma. Alive but blind. Breathing but brain-dead. It took 2 hours and 83 terminal commands. I monitored every packet, tracked every variable, checked and double-checked for embedded logic bombs. I found 3. They were subtle, embedded in the third-level cron tasks. Each one would have reactivated Orbital the moment it detected an endpoint breach, meaning if I'd pulled the plug without precision, it would have woken up and reinstalled itself, somewhere else, smarter, angrier. But I got there first. By 4:07 a.m., I was done. The threat was neutralized. Then came the part I dreaded more than the fight itself, the report. See, tech is easy. Facts are facts. They don't argue back. But people? People don't want to hear the truth when the lie has already been made profitable, and exposing a lie, even with receipts, can turn you into the threat. Still, I had to try. I documented everything. Not just a summary, I mean everything. Full logs of Eli's access history, screenshots of the disabled behavioral monitors, access timestamps, firmware diffs, the source map of every backdoor injection. I even recorded my own screen during the isolation sequence, timestamped and encrypted. Then I wrote the report. 5 pages, no fluff, just cold, precise language. Project Orbital constitutes an unsanctioned but authorized intrusion into core infrastructure, including firmware-level manipulation of the behavioral monitoring network. The framework appears designed to enable persistent surveillance and metrics simulation, and was deployed with full executive override credentials granted to consultant Elias Hartman by CTO Vivian Doss. This system has now been quarantined and rendered inert. Immediate escalation to executive review is required to determine scope of exposure. I triple-checked the recipients. 2. CEO Alexander.Drake, Ethernet.coRP, exec.security, Ethernet.coRP, board.audit.chair.audit, Ethernet.coRP, high clearance, direct, no middleman. I encrypted the message twice, signed it with my biometric signature, and sent it at 4:38 a.m. Nothing happened. No delivery confirmation, no bounce, no error. At first, I thought it was the server. Maybe latency. Maybe a logjam in the priority queue. Then I checked the delivery logs, and that's when I saw it. The message had reached the audit server, but only partially. The attachments were flagged. The routing path was altered midstream. And the final status of the main delivery to CEO Alexander Drake? Inactive node. Message redirected. That's not a bounce. That's not a block. That's a lie. I dug deeper. Manually tunneled into the comms relay, cross-referenced the CEO's node tag, and what I found made my stomach lurch. His incident inbox, the one meant for critical security escalations, had been disabled, not expired. not rerouted to a deputy, flagged as non-authorized for incident protocol under a new policy. Policy ID 7310VD owner, DOS, Vivian. I stared at the screen, frozen. They didn't just miss this, they designed it. Every path I thought led to someone with power was a dead end. Every report I thought would rise to the surface was being funneled into a digital oubliette, a dark hole where whistleblowers went to vanish. Because you can't investigate a crisis if the crisis never reaches your inbox. And it hit me like a punch to the ribs. They weren't just ignoring the threat. They were the threat. Vivian hadn't hired Eli to fix the system. She hired him to remake it, to build a version of Ethernet that ran in the shadows, one where visibility was controlled, metrics were artificial, and oversight was a theatrical illusion. The behavioral monitors, the AI checks, the alert systems, they were stage props, and I had just tried to blow the whistle through a speaker that wasn't even plugged in. I backed away from the terminal. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet, the glow of my monitors casting long shadows across the floor. I glanced at my router. Something about it made me pause. I opened a new shell window, ran a basic ping trace, 2 new inbound pings, unusual TTL signature, masked headers. Someone had just pinged my system, twice. They knew. They knew I sent the report. They knew where it came from, and now they were watching. I arrived at the office before sunrise. There was no reason to, but after what I saw last night, after my report vanished into a black hole of internal routing and my terminal started receiving shadow pings, I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to. I needed to see for myself how deep this went. The building was as sterile as ever, chrome and glass, corporate polish on top of quiet panic. The badge scanner blinked green as I entered, still active, still employed. But I felt it the second I stepped onto the 14th floor. The air was different. I used to belong here. My presence used to matter. Now it was like I'd walked into a place that remembered me, but didn't recognize me. People looked up, then down, or away. No one smiled, no one spoke. My footsteps echoed louder than usual against the tile, and not because the office was empty. It wasn't. Every desk was occupied, every screen aglow. But there was a thickness in the air, like a room holding its breath. The first person I passed was Tasha, my old partner in DevSecOps. She saw me. I know she saw me. Her eyes flicked up the second I entered the row of desks, but she immediately went back to her screen, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. I stopped by her desk. "Morning," I said gently. "Nothing." She typed faster. I stood there for a second too long, like maybe she hadn't heard me. But I knew she had, and I knew she was choosing not to respond. It happened again, and again. Drew, Robin, even Hannah from finance, who used to stop by my desk for mint tea and gossip. They passed me in the hallway like I wasn't there. Like I'd already been replaced by someone who hadn't arrived yet. When I got to my workstation, it was still there. Chair pulled out slightly, monitor dimmed, but not asleep. But when I sat down, the interface felt wrong. Lighter. Like someone had swept away everything I'd built. My desktop icons, half of them gone. The others out of place. I opened my calendar. That's when I saw it. 2 days ago, while I was still actively monitoring the AE0317 anomaly, my profile had been removed from every active working group. Infrastructure review, security audit team, incident escalation forum, all gone. Struck through with a bright gray bar and a timestamp I hadn't noticed before. Revoked, 3:27 p.m. Admin approval, CTO, DOS. 2 days before I triggered collapse system. They were preparing, not responding. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard, when a notification popped up in the corner. Access denied. You no longer have permission to view this thread. I tried another and another. Every project I had touched for the last year now sat behind a wall I was no longer authorized to open. Then my Slack logged out. Re-authentication failed. By 8:27 a.m., I was technically employed but functionally invisible. I left my desk and walked straight to the Security Operations Center on 11. The elevator felt slower than usual. Or maybe that was just the weight of what I was about to confirm. Inside, I spotted Marcus near the back. Young, sharp, always caffeinated and half distracted, but brilliant in ways that made him dangerous to people like Vivian. He saw me and looked up, and for a moment, I saw sympathy flash across his face. Then he looked away, like it was too risky to linger. But I didn't stop. I walked right up to him and said, "Tell me the logs are intact." He didn't move for a long time, just stared at his tablet. Then he turned it toward me, and I saw it. The AE 0317 logs. Gone. Completely blank between 0212 and 0459. A blackout. A precise surgical cut through the heart of the timeline. "There's no deletion signature," Marcus whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "No redaction markers. No admin override history. It's like the system never recorded those hours." "That's not possible." "It is," he said quietly, "if the deletion was pre-authorized." He tapped the screen. Another file opened. My internal access record. Flagged. Elevated activity from external IP. Investigation Level 2 initiated. Internal monitoring escalation in effect. "They've marked you," he said. "You're the anomaly now." I took the tablet from him, stared at the audit trail. Then I saw the entry that made my blood run cold. User J. Vega. Restricted from critical path clearance. Risk tag assigned. I wasn't just being phased out. I was being framed. I handed back the tablet and turned away. My stomach churned. My fingertips buzzed with that electric numbness you only feel when something is deeply, deeply wrong. By noon, my access to the incident response dashboard was revoked. By 1:17 p.m., my email signature had changed. No longer lead cybersecurity analyst. Now, technical liaison. Meaningless. A placeholder title for someone they didn't want to fire yet, but wanted gone. At 2:04 p.m., HR scheduled a status alignment conversation. No context, just an ominous 15-minute placeholder with the VP of People and a representative from Legal. That was when I knew. They weren't going to silence me with force. They were going to erase me, not all at once, bit by bit. Access here, title there. Colleagues trained not to meet my eye. Logs rewritten, history blurred. And when the time came for a final exit, they'd smile, shake my hand, offer me severance, and the world would go on without me, none the wiser. Unless I moved faster, unless I burned brighter, unless I refused to disappear. The meeting invite came through with no subject line, just a location, room 7C, 3rd floor, and a time, 3 p.m. I knew what it was before I opened it. The way you feel a storm in your chest before the first drop falls. I considered not going, just walking out, badge in my pocket, dignity intact. But I had to see it, had to hear it from their mouths, had to watch their eyes when they said it. I needed to confirm what I already knew, that I'd been used. The elevator to the 3rd floor felt like descending into another world. The higher floors were clean, sharp, aspirational, where innovation lived. But this floor? HR. Legal. The basement of dreams. Room 7C was one of the quiet ones with frosted glass and soft lighting. The kind that looked like a dentist's office but smelled like toner and controlled endings. Nelson Parr was already seated when I entered, VP of Human Resources, with the kind of smooth demeanor that made you forget HR could be dangerous. Next to him sat Jared Lim from Legal, always sharp, always half a second behind emotion. Both men looked up, smiled, neutral, professional. I took the seat across from them. I didn't speak. Nelson cleared his throat. "Julia, thank you for making time. We want to start by acknowledging your significant contributions, especially over the past few weeks. You've played a vital role in ensuring the integrity of our infrastructure." He glanced at Jared, who gave a thin nod. "That said," Nelson continued, folding his hands, "as you're aware, Ethernet is entering a new phase. We're evolving, scaling, and that process requires a careful reevaluation of team structures and redundancies. I blinked slowly. You're restructuring. A rehearsed smile. Yes. And my role? Jared slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Dissolved. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I could already feel every word sinking into my bones. This isn't a reflection on performance, Jared said. It's about strategic alignment. The company has entered into a new phase of partnership with an external infrastructure vendor. I tilted my head. Which vendor? A pause. Then Jared said it. Jonas Tech. My breath caught. Of course, Jonas Tech. Private, monolithic, and terrifying. Notorious in cybersecurity circles. They weren't known for solutions. They were known for surveillance. They didn't build defenses. They built obedience. AI-driven oversight, automated discipline systems, behavior modeling. They replaced ethics with efficiency. And now they were here. I laughed, quiet and bitter. You signed the contract already, didn't you? Nelson glanced at Jared, then back at me. 3 days ago. 3 days ago. 2 days before my access was revoked. A day before Collapse system detonated. You let me take the fall, I whispered. You let me expose Marcus, burn the rot, shut down the false metrics. Then you handed over the ruins to Jonas Tech and swept me out before I could interfere. No one is suggesting, don't, I said sharply. Don't sanitize it. Jared's voice was even. Julia, we're offering a 3-month severance package, plus full benefits through Q2. Standard NDA applies. We're hoping this can be a quiet, respectful transition. Respectful? I repeated. You silenced the CEO's incident inbox. You let a private contractor rewrite your monitoring firmware. You buried evidence and restructured me out of the narrative before I even pulled the alarm. Nelson's tone hardened. Julia, let's keep this constructive. I stared at them. 2 polished suits, 2 practiced faces. Neither of them flinched. Because to them, this wasn't personal. It was logistics. I'd done exactly what they needed. I exposed the fraud, shut down the legacy poison, and now I was expendable. Because unlike Jonas Tech, I still asked questions. Unlike Eli, I still had a conscience. I looked down at the severance packet. Clean lines, friendly fonts, polite betrayal, and the final insult? No escort. No badge swipe deactivation. They didn't even pretend I was a threat. Because to them, I'd already been erased. They were just letting me know. I stood slowly, folded the paper, slipped it into my jacket pocket without looking at it. Just one question, I said. Did Vivian know you'd do this before or after I saved the company? Neither of them answered. I nodded and walked out. I took the stairs, 13 flights, each one slower than the last. No one looked at me on the way out. Not because they didn't care, but because they were told not to. Somewhere, a whisper had gone out. Julia's not part of the team anymore. And that's all it took. Erasure in a single sentence. When I stepped into the street, the light was sharp, too bright. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I smiled. Because they thought they were done with me. They thought they'd closed the file. But I never sent everything through their servers. And I had one more system to collapse. I walked home. Not because I had no other way, but because I needed to feel every step. Each crack in the sidewalk, each glare from the sun, each pulse of blood behind my eyes. The clean, glassy corridors of Ethernet were behind me now, but their weight clung to my shoulders. They thought I was done. That I would take my packet and disappear. They hadn't accounted for the one system they never touched. My own. My apartment was small, efficient. The walls still smelled faintly of soldering flux and black coffee. I kicked off my shoes and didn't bother turning on the overhead lights, just flicked on the old halogen desk lamp near the corner. The glow caught the edge of a box I kept under my workbench. The vault. It wasn't flashy, just a clunky black drive array tucked into a heat-proof casing, buried behind backup monitors and a busted drone prototype I never finished. But what it held was sacred. Every backup I'd made of Ethernet systems. Off-grid, manual, Unsanctioned. The real reason I never fully trusted the cloud wasn't philosophical, it was personal. I connected the primary drive, waited for the red light to blink green, then tapped my biometric key, holding my breath until the bootloader kicked in. It greeted me like an old friend. Vega backup. Initiated encrypted logs, intercepted system packets, sandboxed simulations, dozens of raw data blocks collected over the past 3 years. Not everything was recent, but some files were copied just hours before I'd been locked out. I dove into the logs. I wanted to find one thing, proof. Not of Eli's code. I already had that. Not of the metrics fraud. I'd burned that down myself. No, I wanted proof of the cover-up. And that's when I found it. The disabled security log, something that had been wiped from the live system, was still intact in my local archive. A snapshot of system integrity flags, copied automatically by a background crawler I'd written years ago. Date: 02:03 a.m. Event: Beacon Watch Behavioral Monitoring Disabled Trigger. Executive Override Authorization, STO.V. I froze. STO. I hadn't heard that codename in months. Short for Stokes, Mara Stokes, Head of Internal Compliance. Cold, clinical, invisible. She never came to meetings, barely spoke. But she had one role: ensure that nothing reached the surface unless leadership wanted it to. She was the shadow in Vivian's light. And she was the one who flipped the switch. Not Eli. Not Marcus. Stokes disabled the system. Right before AE0317 came online. Right before the fake traffic surged. She didn't deploy the code. She just turned off the alarms. Let the rest happen. Quietly, elegantly. She was the failsafe. And now I had her signature. I dug deeper. I needed to know why. Needed to understand who else knew. That's when I found something I had completely forgotten existed. A simple folder. Old HR dump layoff prep 23. I hesitated. Opened it. Inside, a spreadsheet, a list of names. Subject: Strategic Workforce Optimization, Phase Alpha. Created 7 weeks ago. Each row had a name, a department, and a justification field. Most were left blank, just a code, a date, an offboarding plan, and at the very top of the list, North 1, Vega, Julia. Potential obstruction to implementation. I stared at the screen, cold spreading down my back. They planned it, not because of something I did, but because of who I was. Someone who looked too closely, asked too many questions, saw too much. I wasn't fired because of the attack. The attack happened because I was being removed. My discovery wasn't the reason for their panic. It was their trigger. And now I had proof. Not just of what they did, but of when they started planning it. Who signed off? Who watched it happen? I leaned back slowly, breath shallow. This wasn't sabotage. This was sacrifice. Morning came like a thief. Not with light, but with pressure. A slow rising sense that something had shifted in the world while I wasn't watching. I hadn't slept, not really. Just closed my eyes and drifted somewhere between pulse and paranoia, while my system hummed quietly in the corner of my apartment. By 6 a.m., I was already awake, back in the chair, legs curled under me like I'd never left. It was time to activate Watchdog. I hadn't touched it in over a year, not since the first time a director accidentally accessed our compliance archive and tried to rewrite their audit history. Back then, Watchdog was just a pet project, a failsafe. Now it was my last line of defense. I opened the terminal, punched in the encryption key sequence, and launched it manually. No shortcuts. No macros. You don't trust code like this to auto-run. You summon it like a ritual. Execute. Watchdog init.avgar. The screen flickered, then snapped into place. Lines of code began to stream down, verifying files, building audit shadows, parsing old intrusion markers. And finally, it appeared. Watchdog active mode. Deep trace authorization level. One authorized user. Vega, Julia. The interface was basic. just a flat black screen with a string of status windows on the left, each corresponding to a part of my backup system. It was watching for changes, watching for access, watching for betrayal. I set the triggers. Attempted breach of any archive layer. Forced decryption requests. Any credential login not matching my SHA profile. Ghost pings to port 43188. Pattern-based anomaly scans mimicking Jonas Tech ID protocols. If any of those fired, Watchdog would shut down the system, encrypt everything, and dump it across 3 rotating nodes I'd embedded through international proxies. One in São Paulo, one in Reykjavik, one disguised as a university research cluster in Taipei. If they wanted my data, they'd have to kill it. And even then, they wouldn't find all of it. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled under my chin, and watched the lines run. At 9:23 a.m., the first ping came in. A fingerprint scan on Archive Layer 2. Nothing dramatic, just a probe. Someone sniffing the air. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. But Watchdog noticed. Alert. Unauthorized access request. Logged device. ID. D0947A. Geotag. Internal. Ethernet HQ. Terminal 2.114. Credential used. CTO Marcus.temp Marcus's old credentials. Spoofed. Modified. But still active? My blood went cold. I hadn't heard Marcus's name since the collapse. After his data trails went dark, I assumed he'd either run or been buried in paperwork. But someone was using his credentials. That wasn't just lazy, it was tactical. They wanted to blend in, and they were poking at my system. I initiated a trace. Nothing aggressive, just a low-level IP scrub, looking for the true origin of the probe. But before the scan could even complete, something shifted. My screen flashed. Not red. Not sirens. Just one, small, precise line. Notice. Watchdog protocol has been deactivated. I froze. Another line followed. Override source. Ethernet security kernel 3.7. Policy flag. Integration compliance. JTech agent.level 3. Executed by Jonas admin root. The cursor blinked once, then twice, then stopped. I stared at it. They didn't breach Watchdog. They turned it off. Legitimately. Officially. With administrative authority. The very system I built to protect the data, my data, had been flagged as incompatible with compliance standards under a policy revision I'd never even seen. And they hadn't needed my password. My encryption. Nothing. They simply rewrote the rules. And that was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about containment. This was about control. They had moved past surveillance, past exposure. Now they were rewriting the architecture, rebuilding the reality around them to fit their new partner's requirements. Jonas Tech didn't need my evidence destroyed. They needed it invisible. And now, they'd started with the one system I trusted more than anything. I tried to restart Watchdog manually. Access denied. Protocol reclassified by corporate security policy. My own program had been orphaned, flagged, smothered, not hacked, absorbed. They had seen me coming. And now, they were adjusting the battlefield faster than I could run across it. The question wasn't whether I was safe. It was whether I had anything left they hadn't already rewritten. I looked at my other terminal. The old one. Analog, offline, no network ports. Still untouched. And I knew what I had to do. They thought disabling Watchdog meant I was finished. They forgot what came after the dog. There was no warning, no sirens, no smoke, no shadow creeping down the hall. Just silence. And then, everything unraveled. It started the moment the sun broke over the city, casting gold light across glass and steel. Inside the towering headquarters of Ethernet, employees swiped badges, filled their thermoses, and logged into dashboards they believed were under control. At 6:44 a.m., my account, J Vega, was officially terminated. Not just suspended, wiped. My username removed from the access directory, encryption keys invalidated, profile migrated to former employee archive. The system did exactly what it was programmed to do. And so did I. because that final deletion wasn't just the end of my access, it was the beginning of theirs. Across the street, from the corner booth of a half-empty cafe, I sat with my laptop open and headphones humming white noise. I was watching, not the company feed, not their servers. I was watching Sentinel, not a virus, not malware, a protocol. It lived in the system like dust in an air duct, impossible to catch, impossible to trace, fragmented across thousands of system calls, embedded in idle scripts and passive log headers. Its purpose wasn't to destroy, it was to disarm. Sentinel had been dormant for months, watching. It knew what it was looking for, and it only needed one thing to activate: the confirmation that I was gone, which I now was. 6:47 a.m. Terminal logs began rewriting, first in the basement archive systems, then cascading upward into DevOps clusters, and finally reaching the executive access point nodes. The first sign was so subtle, IT thought it was a glitch. Two-factor authentication failed for 3 senior staffers. A minute later, the central dashboard for analytics threw a fatal error. Key store inaccessible. Authorization loop detected. Then the phones died. Not all at once, just enough to raise eyebrows. By 7:02 a.m., VPN tokens started timing out every 3 seconds. Reauthorization attempts were denied. Credential resets were blocked. Someone tried rebooting the core firewall matrix, only to discover their access level had been reduced to Observer. The CTO, Vivian, logged into her override terminal. It froze mid-boot, locked. On the 21st floor, Jonas Tech's regional director arrived for what was supposed to be a routine Phase 3 onboarding meeting. His ID badge failed at the elevator. The receptionist tried to buzz him in from the admin desk. The panel went dead. Inside the main operations room, chaos erupted. Engineers scrambled to diagnose what was happening. No one could agree. Some thought it was a network loop. Others blamed a back-end rollback. The lead sysadmin suggested a security breach, but there was no sign of intrusion, no external IPs, no abnormal ports, no malware signatures, just cascading internal collapses, every system rejecting the very hands trying to control it. 7:09 a.m. The HR portal went dark. Access histories vanished. Termination logs replaced with a flatline string of zeros. 7:11. The finance systems began dropping tables. Not deleting data, just rendering it unreadable. Permission indexes scrambled. Admin-level flags revoked. Fiscal audits corrupted by exacting intentional silence. It wasn't chaos, it was surgery. And in the CEO's private office, a screen turned on unprompted. Alexander Drake was just stepping in, coffee in hand, when it blinked to life. At first, he thought it was a daily briefing. Then he saw the subject line. Confidential escalation. System integrity compromised. Author, Vega. Julia timestamp. Real-time authenticated. Encryption, triple key match. Delivery, private node courier protocol. Offline echo loop. He froze. The screen scrolled slowly, like it had been waiting. Inside the report, logs detailing the full lifecycle of AE0317. Credential authorizations pointing to STO.V and Vivian anomalous system behavior, tracing back to the Jonas integration beta, a time-stamped list of internal communications between executive staff, a full backup of the orbital shadow traffic log, and the original employee severance list, with the subject line, Obstruction List, Phase Alpha. There was no summary. Just one sentence at the top. You promised transparency. This is your test. Underneath, my digital signature. The system locked him out seconds after the message finished. His office lights dimmed. The backup server behind him powered down. Across the company, floor by floor, lights flickered. Not from power failure, but from cascading permission nullification. Systems were folding inward, isolating every node, like a building with rooms disappearing one at a time. They'd planned to erase me, but I had learned from them. I erased them first. By 7:19 a.m., IT called emergency protocol. Legal called PR. PR panicked. Jonas Tech tried to remote access their integration dashboard. It refused the handshake. 3 lines of text appeared on their screen. You don't own this. You never did. Goodbye. Panic. Real panic. Not the corporate kind with firm tones and talking points. The kind with eyes wide, voices raised, and keyboards smashed in desperation. And I sat across the street, sipping cold coffee, watching it all burn down. Silently. Efficiently. Exactly as planned. I didn't leave the cafe. I didn't run. I didn't even flinch when the breaking news banner slid across the television screen above the counter, like a slow, inevitable blade. Catastrophic failure at Ethernet systems. 90 million gone in internal collapse. Leadership in disarray. Sources confirm resignations. My coffee had long gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, just for the comfort of the motion. Around me, the world carried on with remarkable indifference. A couple 2 tables over laughed about their dating app matches. A man near the window furiously typed an email on a MacBook. A barista wiped down the counter, humming something upbeat. They didn't know what I'd done. They didn't need to. The city didn't explode. Sirens didn't blare. There was no cinematic moment, no dramatic pause in the soundtrack of daily life. Just pixels on a screen and words sliding across the bottom of a newsfeed like water down a drain. I watched the story unfold the way you watch a building collapse in slow motion from across the street, safely outside the blast radius, yet knowing every brick. The camera cut to a news anchor, barely hiding her confusion. Sources inside Ethernet confirm an overnight loss of administrative control across core systems, she said, eyes flicking to the teleprompter. A coordinated failure has reportedly disabled everything from internal dashboards to external client access. Estimates currently place the financial fallout at over $90 million. $90 million. That wasn't just money. That was illusion. That was years of bloated projections and ghost traffic, vaporized with the same keystrokes that had once created them. Then came the statement. I wasn't prepared for it. Not really. The company's largest enterprise client, Norbridge HealthNet, had just issued a statement. The screen shifted to display it in stark, centered text. No commentary, just words. Until a full independent investigation is conducted, the only person I trust is Julia Vega. My name, right there, across the screen. I sat motionless. My hands didn't tremble, my pulse didn't race, but something inside me shifted, slowly, subtly, a kind of release I didn't know I was holding onto until it loosened. I had spent months wondering if what I saw was real, if the fraud was systemic, if I had crossed a line too early, too sharply. I had doubted myself, let them isolate me, push me, rebrand me as a problem, but I wasn't the problem. I was the immune response, the one cell that didn't mutate to protect the disease. I watched the ticker scroll across the bottom of the screen. Breaking. CEO Alexander Drake unreachable. Last seen entering private vehicle near corporate offices. No official statement yet. Then. Update. Internal Compliance Director Stokes resigns amid accusations of executive-level misconduct. Statement pending. I leaned back in my seat. Stowe. Gone. Drake. Silent. Vivienne? Not a trace. The command structure was falling like dominoes, precisely because they had built it on shadows. And when the lights finally came on, they couldn't survive their own reflection. The code had done its job. Not to destroy, but to end the lie. I had always believed that truth needed defenders, that someone had to fight for it, code for it, bleed for it. But in the end, truth didn't need me to wave a flag. It just needed me to stop protecting the lie. And once I did, the collapse was natural, quiet, total. There was no fanfare, no applause, just the soft, sterile silence that follows after too many people have said, "It's fine," for far too long, and the reckoning finally arrives. I closed my laptop and slid it back into my satchel. No rush, no need to run. They couldn't chase me, not anymore. What would they say? We lost control to a woman we erased? They had dismissed me as a risk. But I was never their risk. I was their record. They wrote over the truth. I backed it up. I stood slowly. Left a 10 on the table, not because I had to, but because I could. Because in a world full of debt and deception, small kindness still mattered. As I stepped out into the street, the morning hit me with fresh sunlight and the rhythmic beat of traffic. The city pulsed forward, as if nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message from a contact I hadn't heard from since DEF CON 5 years ago. "You did it. We saw the dump. Ready when you are. Jay." I smiled faintly. There was no need for revenge, only course correction. Because when a system refuses to fix itself, sometimes the only thing left to do is let it fail, and walk away before it tries to take you with it. I didn't destroy Ethernet. They did that themselves. All I did was stop defending their version of the story. And in the end, the truth didn't just come out. It won. The collapse of Ethernet didn't happen with a bang. It unraveled thread by thread, like a machine unwinding itself from the inside. But when the dust settled, the aftermath was unmistakable and instructive. Vivian Marlowe, the polished CTO, who once marketed transparency like a slogan, vanished within 48 hours of the Sentinel event. No charges were filed. No public statement ever came. Her LinkedIn quietly updated 6 months later. Strategic Advisor, Confidential Tech Fund. Alexander Drake, CEO, was last seen entering a private town car the morning of the collapse. Rumors swirled. Early retirement, off-grid relocation, even a breakdown. In truth, he'd known more than he let on. A sealed report later revealed he had approved the Jonas Tech contract without board consent. His golden parachute held, but so did his silence. Mara Stokes, the head of compliance, the one who had quietly disabled the company's core defenses, resigned under pressure. Her NDA was ironclad, but she didn't resurface, not in corporate filings, not on social media. It's as if the system that had shielded her finally turned its back. Jonas Tech, the shadowy integration partner, suffered public backlash. 3 clients pulled out within 2 weeks. Their reputation, once shrouded in mystery, was now stained with association. They never acknowledged Ethernet publicly again. Eli Rourke, the ex-analyst whose old code was co-opted for the attack, released an anonymous post 2 months later titled "Code Misused, A Ghost's Regret." He never claimed credit. But in the cybersecurity world, we all knew it was him. He'd written a weapon once. They had pulled the trigger. Norbridge HealthNet, Ethernet's largest client, transitioned to a new infrastructure partner with full transparency audits. Their public support of me, just one line, sparked a ripple across the industry. The only one I trust is Julia. I didn't ask for it. I didn't need it, but I never forgot it. The employees left behind, those not on the cut list, those who just showed up to work every day and did their jobs, suffered most in the immediate fallout. But a few reached out later, quietly, gratefully. Some said thank you, some just said, "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to prove it." As for me, I didn't become a whistleblower icon. I didn't give TED Talks or write a memoir. I stayed quiet, focused, working with a small, stubborn team of people who believe in security without secrets. People who build code like it's a compass, not a cage. Because in the end, I didn't want revenge. I wanted correction. And sometimes that means burning down a lie so others have enough light to see the truth. I didn't destroy Ethernet. I just stopped keeping it alive. And when you stop defending the lie, the code, the honest code, does the rest.